actually inspired by a true story that I heard about from a friend who's in the Korean Christian community here in Southern California. And this particular incident was like a college group, and it was a different country that they had gone to. And so it was a bit of a, I really kind of wasn't interested in writing about that particular event and the specificity of what happened to those people. So I kind of intentionally, like I looked it up, but there was actually very little reported on that. And I think also I found it to be just a very compelling way in, the idea of it, to write about the male gaze, coming of age as a girl in a patriarchy, power dynamics that affect survivors reporting abuse. And then also, I got this idea to engage with this, with our culture of revenge fantasy, and, like exploring the way that we as a culture use genre to kind of fantasize about justice and revenge, and I think it's very interesting that most of those fantasies in those genres are overwhelmingly male driven. And yet, that's the model that I think we have access to when we're young, in terms of what we should do if something like this were to happen. And, in researching and writing the play, I wrote this from a very personal place, so it didn't involve a ton of research. But I certainly spoke to friends who had survived sexual abuse as, children. And I also have spent time when workshopping the play in conversation with Korean American actors and Korean American friends who I can kind of run the play past and see, what feels like I got it and what feels like maybe not as specific as it could be. So that process, as always, I find as a playwright, one of the best parts of the writing process is workshopping the play with actors and getting those insights from actors, directors, collaborators.
That's so incredible to hear. I feel like that intentionality around centering and really listening to the voices centered in the play and the identity centered in the play, to make sure you're telling in like an authentic story that is, respectful and truthful and authentic, is so incredible to hear. And I wish more playwrights did that. I feel like there are more and more playwrights that do that, but sometimes you can tell, you read a play and you could just tell you have not talked to anyone in that community, friend. And so you can really feel that in Man of God. And also, like, I'm a sucker for plays that are like filled with like young women's rage, right? Those of us that have been socialized as femme, as female, we're taught to like swallow that and not, demonstrate that or let that be front facing. And so seeing young women be pissed and like fantasize about murdering their abuser, is like just such juicy, potent, and like relatable and relevant material.
Yeah, I want to add. Yeah, I want to absolutely add to that. And also with being an AAPI like woman, and same thing in that community too, as a young Asian woman, to be able to watch young women who look like me have that rage when I couldn't, is super powerful. And that was a huge draw for me with this play when the first time I saw the reading at the Magic.
It came out pretty fully baked, I'd say, early on in the process. Huge things have not shifted a ton. It took me some time to like really get the ending the way that I wanted it. That was something that I was kind of exploring at Magic, and then in the world premiere at East West, I was trying a lot of different ways to end the play. And then at the Geffen, now there have been 2 productions at the Geffen. So there was the production that got shut down in March 2020, like the day before we opened, and then the production that we just closed. And it was interesting, you know, between those two, I would been thinking a lot about about Jen's fantasy, the mafia fantasy, and like the mob movie genre. That was originally a kind of like a crime procedural genre. And I was kind of inspired by Jen's desire to become a lawyer someday. And she's such a verbal and very cerebral character. So I really wanted a genre for her fantasy that would embrace that part of her personality, because others didn't quite feel right for her. But, you know, ultimately, I kind of felt like revenge isn't really a big part of that crime procedural genre. And in the production prior to the pandemic, you know, there just wasn't really time to rewrite that and try something else, just for all the, you know, design reasons that go into it. But during the pandemic, you know, we had time to think. And so Maggie Burrows, who is the director, and we spent a long time discussing like what other genres might be right for this and spitballing things. And eventually I landed on the mafia, you know, mafia movies, The Godfather. And that kind of really felt like a better fit, where you kind of still have that verbal aspect, and that kind of, I'd say her personality feels really right for that scene. But then there still is the like big violence and the kind of like, you betrayed me, I'm going to get back at you kind of thing. It's a huge part of mob hits. So yeah, that's another one of the changes that came along. But like, you know, in terms of where the play starts and where it ends and who these characters are and what they're talking about, like all of that was like very early on, just kind of fell into place.
Michelle, I feel like this is a great opportunity, the question that you've been dying to ask. Do you want to share it with Anna?
Which one?
About the mob scene.
Oh, yeah. So I've been thinking,
So much about having, it's just, you know, not every play gets multiple productions. And so I love that, you know, each production can kind of be its own thing, and the designers get to put their spin on it. The director puts their taste into it. I think that's awesome. So I can't wait to see.
Yeah. Well, Anna, I'm also really curious about, you write for Apple TV, the hit show Severance, which many of our community members are huge fans of. And we were curious if playwriting has influenced your screenwriting at all. And, you know, what are some of those key differences between your screenwriting and playwriting process?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all writing. It's all very connected. It's all storytelling, you know, through dialogue and action. That's it on a very simple level.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, I'd say it certainly, of course, it influences it in a big way. You know, the different media need different things. You know, different stories work well in these different media. So you kind of have to know what works and why in different media. And I think that's kind of the key to working across media. So yeah, so I do a lot of thinking about that. And that, you know, Man of God is kind of an example of like, I tried to write the most theatrical play I could possibly write. And I think it's because it's, you know, one room continuous action for the most part, but it has these fantasy scenes that really can like utilize elements of puppetry, utilize elements of physical theater. All the designers are like giving it their all. You know, every single designer has to like really bring their A game to this play. And you know, I also wanted to write a play that was like, that was a big challenge for young Asian American actors. That was something that was like really important to me, because it feels like there is a huge lack of opportunities for young AAPI actors to actually play roles in which they're the lead and they carry a whole play through from beginning to end. Because it's a technically demanding play for any actor, but especially for young actors. But I really wanted to do that because I feel like when those opportunities are there, you learn by doing, and they are now able, by just doing a production of this play, they're going to be a stronger actor than when they started. And like, we need more plays like that so that there are more AAPI actors in their 30s and 40s who can really go toe to toe with like the best actors who have gotten the opportunity to play leading roles since they were in school, you know? So, you know, that was another aspect too, where I was thinking really hard about like the broader industry and what, you know, all the different collaborators that come into this process can get out of it as well. You know, I see that all as very linked to working across media. Like it's, I think that the key is just knowing what kind of, beyond just what happens in the story, you have to think a lot about how the story is going to be told. It's going to be on a stage. What kind of theater are you aiming for? What kind of things do you have to, how long, you know, when you do these fantasies that require these technical aspects, like how quick can people change their clothes? And I shaved it down to the very bone in this one. But there's a way to do it. So, you know, like there's that's one of the things that I really love about working in all of these different media is like, you think about what are these practical constraints and how far can you push it with, but still make it possible to do it. And yeah, like in TV writing, you just have a different palette of paints to work with, and same with film. You know, I'd say in some ways, you know, people say that television and theater are closer than television and film, because there's a lot more dialogue usually in television. So it tends to be a medium that has longer scenes than in film, and like more talking than in film. There's a lot more visual storytelling in film generally. You can always find exceptions, but I'd say that's a pretty good general rule. And then in theater, you know, like this play is basically one long scene with like some intercuts, but you could not really do a television episode that's like this. It's harder to do that. So you kind of like learn the different rules of each medium, and then the fun comes with like when you start breaking those rules and when you start pushing things. And I think those tend to be those, you know, episodes of television or movies or plays that people really talk about, is when you really break the rules, but you have to kind of know what those rules are.
Theater maker that's so like, and purely theater, that's so interesting to hear both the similarities and like the differences, and also the sort of framework you're carrying in around like, okay, what is theatrical, or like what is going to keep an audience engaged through these different mediums, and how, you know, dialogue is affected by that, or like stage picture, or, you know, visual image has to be sort of considered in these different ways for these different formats and mediums.
Yeah. The packing scene, I think, is another good example of like, that's only going to work in theater. I don't think that scene would work in film, even though there's no dialogue. I just don't think that scene would work in film, and I don't think it would work in television, because it's about the durational experience of being in the same physical space, and it's about the contrast of having spent, you know, 70 minutes with these incredibly verbal, loud characters who then are made silent, and the length of time that you have to sit with them and watch them pack their things, and the way that an audience member watches a stage picture. You know, the director and the actors, of course, and, you know, designers to some extent as well, like help kind of dictate where focus goes based on the staging, but audience members are free to look anywhere on the stage. So that's just a very different thing than having a camera that you really create a frame around what exactly you're supposed to be looking at. Like it's just a very different kind of engagement with the picture you're looking at. And there's awareness of the other bodies in the room as well when you're in a theater too. So that is part of what makes that packing scene so powerful, is you're in this space, you become very aware of the other people who are around you, in addition, of course, to being very in the play. So there's yeah, it's an interesting, it's, I've been approached about potentially adapting this into, film or television, and I just don't think that it'll work. I think, unfortunately, I did my job too well, and it's only a play.
I mean, I think you also named something really powerful in talking about the audience too, right? Like they're this sort of additional character in, not every theater production, but many, especially when we are calling into question sort of the viewer's gaze, or like just gaze in general, whether that's male gaze or a white gaze, right? And I think both of those things have a really big impact, or are deeply related to Man of God specifically. But also the fact that like there's a group of humans in a room together watching this play out on stage and having that proximity. You're feeling like breathing the same air and feeling what these characters are feeling in a way that I feel like only theater can accomplish, because when you're viewing it through a screen, you have that little bit of distance. You're not feeling that emotional, like energetic tension, right? In that same visceral, palpable way. And so, it's cool that like, people are interested in the story and bringing it to more folks. But I really appreciate you hearing like, no, that's not the medium. That's not the
It should be great, but I don't think so.
Anna, one thing I'm really curious about, and our marketing director, Jamie, is a huge fan of Severance, is like, from your perspective, folks that maybe watch the show Severance and are not like regular theater goers or have never seen a production before, why should they come see Man of God?
Like people who've seen Severance?
Yeah. People that are like maybe big fans of the show and regular viewers of the show. Yeah.
I mean, I think the tone of Severance is similar in a lot of ways to it just tends to be the tone that I tend to work in. So probably not a coincidence, but yeah, I think that that I'm interested in dramas that are also really funny. I think that balance of light and dark and that absurd sense of humor, that I just think you look around our world and it is completely absurd, and you have to kind of laugh even as you're crying all the time. There's something so I think that's kind of the tone of what Severance is doing, and then it also is very true of Man of God as well. That I know it's described as a comedy because I think that's the only way to sort of get across that it is such a comedic piece and that there's so many laughs along the way, but it's at its core it's a drama, and I think that's true of Severance. That's true of a lot of the stuff that I write and that I like to watch as well.
No, that so resonates in thinking about all the humor and love and just like teenage girl shenanigans that happens in Man of God, but also that it's speaking to a now, it's speaking to what, I mean, folks of all gender, but particularly young women and femmes are experiencing growing up in a cis hetero patriarchy, right? Like these are sort of things that, despite nuances across, race or gender or sexual orientation, this is something that many of us are contending with, have contended with, or are going to contend with. And it asks us to sort of, view what world do we want to be leaving behind, or how can we combat these things so future generations don't have to experience it. And I so appreciate the way the play balances that comedy and that, drama, and also inspires me as a viewer or as a reader to like think about the world that I'm participating in and what my role is in making it better, right? And so yeah, it's really quite exciting. Connected to that, Man of God was written pre-pandemic. We thought 2016, or was it?
It was maybe 2017 or 18.
Okay.
Can't remember exactly.
Yeah, but like, since it's written pre-pandemic, pre a lot of very troubling things that have been happening in our society, in the midst of the Trump era. I'm curious you view the play through a different lens in this moment, you know, mid-pandemic, post Roe v. Wade reversal, post, additional productions. And like, yeah, if so, how do you view the play differently? And like, what is some of the resonance for this current moment?
I think, I wrote this play, or the first draft of it at least. I think several, I think I wrote the whole play before Harvey Weinstein bombshell stuff and pre Me Too movement becoming a big conversation point. So I think in some ways, some of the fury of the play came out of a sense of like, literally no one's talking about this. And then like, since I wrote the play, people started really talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I think that's great. That's what I had hoped for. And yet at the same time, I think that there was a sense of like, oh, okay, now we fixed that. But I don't know. I keep thinking that maybe things are different now, but then I've had so many teenage girls who see the play come and tell me, or contact me to tell me that I got it exactly right. And this is what they feel. And they feel helpless and like they're alone all the time. And so unfortunately, I think we have a really long way to go still on these issues of power dynamics and the way it intersects with gender and age. I think it's unfortunately just one of those ancient problems that we're still wrestling with how to address. And so I don't know. I don't really think of it all that differently than when I wrote it. I don't think that this is something that's easily solved. And the moment where, the pastor comes into the room, I feel like is a moment where like at least I think I wrote it intentionally in a way that can kind of be interpreted by each production as they come to it. But I think that he comes into that room preparing to come clean, and that's what he's bringing in with him, and that he changes his mind when he's actually at that precipice where he could take one more step and admit it and face all the consequences. And he came in here expecting to do that, but then it's just so easy to use that power for his own safety, and he does. So I think that there's that's part of it as well, that I hope will kind of like keep this play feeling timeless, that it's not quite as simple as like he's a monster and we just have to eradicate the monsters and then we'll be good. I think that it's a temptation that comes to everybody in different ways, is to, you have power that you could use for your own benefit. Are you going to use it or not? And when there's times where it harms others, to use that power to protect yourself. And there's times where it's really, really tempting to do that. And many people will choose that. So I don't know. I hope that the play can stay relevant in that sense. And I also hope that the play stops being relevant completely, and that we don't have to deal with this when we're teenagers anymore.
Yeah, it's interesting because I also feel that the girls themselves, just within their own interaction, play with that power dynamic as well, and how it resonates, it macros out that way, in how Mimi, yields her power. Even like Quinoa does the same. So it is interesting about when they're faced with a particular situation, the choices that they make, that power leads that first in some of their decision making.
Yeah, I don't think there's any way that we're going to get rid of power dynamics. I mean, in the play, just as you're saying, among the girls, like those power dynamics shift line to line. It's just what it is to be a person. That's why dialogue is so interesting. It's a way of shifting power, and people can either give that power or take that power in a moment to moment way that's so exciting to watch. Yeah. the core of debate.
I mean, it's so interesting because, I think this play asks audience members to really contend with their power, their privilege, their complicity in ways that I don't think our folks are readily thinking of, right? We're all sort of living our lives, trying to survive. For many of us with marginalized identities, like it's very easy to step out into the world and realize, like, I don't have any power. I'm oppressed. Like, what? No, but it's there, right? And we either exercise it or don't, in relationship to other people. But each one of us, kind of carries our own power, and it calls us to think about how we wield it, or at least acknowledge it or not, right? Which is,
yeah, and it shifts in different contexts, different spaces, with different people in the room. I mean, just the shift in how these girls are so powerful, and then the moment that the pastor walks in, it changes. I mean, yeah, I find all of that stuff really, really interesting. I think that's a big reason that I'm a playwright. I just think it's endlessly fascinating to think about.
Well, to close this out, I'm curious to hear from both of you, like, what are you most looking forward to or excited about for the upcoming production of Man of God here at Shotgun Players?
Most excited. I think for me, I'm most excited to share this story. I think one, for Shotgun, this is their first all AAPI cast. And this is a story that I personally haven't seen on these stages. And so I'm really excited to see, especially with our Berkeley audience, and their reaction, and also to my community, for the folks that I want to invite to see this, and the reflection it is in their own homes, being able to start conversation, because I do agree, I know that growing up also, I didn't have, being, immigrant family, didn't have that accessibility to be able to talk about those things. I mean, that was my draw to this play, was seeing myself and saying, yeah, I placed myself in these characters on TV and in film to just try to understand how the world operates. And so that's still ongoing. And so I hope that that community can look at that and say, hey, things, the micro changes, as long as it's a micro change, as long as there's change. And that's, I find that important. So hopefully the audience has that as a takeaway when they see this play.
I'm just, I haven't worked with Shotgun Players before in a full production. And so I'm just very excited to get to be in conversation with this community and these artists and audiences that I haven't really had the chance to be with before. So I'm very excited to see it.
Actually, before we quit recording, Michelle, do you want to just close us out with a little bit more about your vision for the production and what folks should get excited for?
Oh yeah. I mean, I mentioned this earlier. I love this idea of the lens and looking at the confinement of things. And so it's been the conversation I have with the designers about the box and how the box is reflected in so many ways, like the TV screen, the movie screen, the film, the camera itself, and that containment of it. And it's so important when the outside comes in, or that last moment when they actually leave this box, and what happens because it's real time, even though you do bend time with the revenge fantasy moments, which I love, but we're on the journey in real time with these young women. And so that feeling of all of this transpires within this space, and then they leave it, and the audience, what that is, watching this rectangle of a set, and having all of that happen. So that's kind of a bigger vision of this play for me. And then the pushing the extremes, like we're in such a deep dive in table work and talking about the relationship and cultural. We have a couple of folks who are Korean and have experience, especially in the Christian church. And so the dynamics about that, and also that unit of being young Korean Americans in a family unit and what that means amongst the girls. So we're diving into that, and then pushing on the other end the revenge fantasy. How far can we make it as fantastical um, uh, as possible in that genre? Because I think that dynamic as an audience member, to be able to show those two, really is, I don't know, very like juicy and delicious. Yeah, so that's kind of an overall vision of the play for me. You know, I'm such a big collaborator, and I want to make sure that everybody's voices on the team their artistry is shown. So like you were saying earlier, Anna, it is one a dream for a director to direct this, but also for a team of designers to be able to like what it looks like, what their luggage looks like, how it reflects their character, all of those things. I want to make sure that we get that as an audience member.
So cool to hear.
Yeah.
Well, thank you both so much for this conversation. It's so exciting.